Wembley can be a lonely place when you lose, even surrounded by 85,000 despondent Spurs fans. But how have things gone so badly wrong in such a short space of time? And how can it be fixed? This is your e-Spurs podcast.
Come on, you Spurs! Come on, you Spurs! Come on, you Spurs! Come on, you Spurs! Top.
Hi guys, welcome back after a 4-week break. Don't forget we want you to subscribe to the show via iTunes or on Acast and you'll get every new episode direct as it's released. You can of course follow us on Twitter or Instagram at @e_Spurs. If you're more of a Facebook kind of person, it's e-Spurs page on there. And we're also on YouTube, Pinterest and Tumblr. On the e-Spurs podcast tonight, we'll chew over more Wembley woe for Spurs. We take your questions on everything and anything THFC related. But that's not all, because we'll also be talking to Chris Slegg on his brand new book covering the history of the lane and our farewell to our home for the last 117 years. So really looking forward to that tonight. Let's introduce the team that I'll be talking all things Tottenham with tonight. It's Jason, Ricky and Ian. How you doing, lads?
Very well, mate. Getting ready for the Europa League.
Rick, how you doing?
Yes, still hanging in there, just.
Funnily enough, we was in great form when we stopped, and we come back to you in a bit of a sticky situation, as it were. But as I mentioned, we're also pleased to welcome to the Spurs podcast tonight Spurs fan, journalist and now author Chris Slegg. Chris, how you doing?
Good evening, guys. Yeah, doing not so well after last night. I was hoping to be joining you on a slightly happier occasion. Certainly, you know, your last show, and that was actually the last time I saw us play at 90 minutes. Actually, being at a game was the Man City game, and seeing that performance was incredible. And then last night, the polar opposite, and trying to work out what's gone wrong in the month of October, really. So not feeling great right now, but overall optimistic about the state of our club at the moment, given what I've seen in my adult lifetime, really.
Bit of optimism. And of course, Chris, we will of course be later on in the podcast be talking to you about your book. So thanks for joining us tonight.
Excellent stuff.
Let's start, shall we? Let's start the autopsy of the game at Wembley on Wednesday night. Of course, Leverkusen in the Champions League. It just doesn't go right for us at Wembley, does it? Jay, I know you stayed up into the wee small hours last night over there in Thailand to watch. Let's have your verdict on what happened on Wednesday night at Wembley.
Just an absolute horror show from start to finish. I think the very first ball that we played back to Vertonghen, and he smashed it straight into the closing Leverkusen player. From that moment on, the entire game was just awful, wasn't it? And I think poor old Moussa Sissoko was probably, his performance summed it up. But it seems like the master presser couldn't handle being pressed and couldn't seem to find any way around it at all. And I didn't think they necessarily pressed us for the 90 minutes, but they certainly did in that first half, and we just couldn't find any answer to it, and it was just incredibly poor from start to finish.
It's such a strange one, isn't it? Because, you know, the 11 we put out there last night, it's hard to think of one player other than maybe Vertonghen that actually put in a shift last night, and confidence seemed to have gone. Rick, how do you explain biggest night many of these players will have faced? How do you explain a performance like that?
I don't think you can, Andy. Being quite frank, you know, it's inexcusable. And I think the minimum you demand as a football fan going to that game is 100% effort. Bearing in mind the journey up there, journey back. What frustrates me the most is that a lot of these players come out and say they aspire to be the best. You know, they see themselves as Champions League players, arguably some of them. Some of them like to Christian Eriksen, Moussa Sissoko, and a player who, you know, said he wouldn't want to leave Newcastle unless it was for a Champions League club. What I can't understand and fathom, and I'm talking about as a group here, I'm going to exclude Vertonghen, who I think was the only player last night that could hold his head up with any sense of credibility when he came off the field. But for the rest of the players out there was no sense of any effort, you know, as 100%. And people may say it's confidence, but I look at it and think to myself, I can see if there's a player working tirelessly hard, we'll carry on supporting. Now, a lot has been made last night in terms of the atmosphere, and I do think that's a two-way streak. The fans have to be behind the players, but the players also have to give something for the fans to cheer about. And to be quite frank, like Jace put it, there was nothing really to shout about. The defending at times was schoolboy. We are hanging by a thread, and we shouldn't be for the quality we've got in our squad. We have worked so hard as a football club to get into this competition. And it looks like at the moment we're going out with a whimper. And I just can't foresee why this is happening. You know, there are certain times, I will agree, I'm a massive, massive Pochettino fan in terms of what he's brought to Spurs. You know, I can't get away from the fact that he's the best manager in my lifetime, what I've witnessed in terms of where he's taken the club onto. But last night, I will say, some of his decision-making, it has to be questioned. You know, we're taking off the likes of Son, who is really one of our only kind of potent goal threats on the game. Fair enough, he obviously didn't score last night, but we're taking him off and we're bringing Nkudu on, who, you know, will offer us that bit more pace. And we're leaving players on, the likes of Sissoko, who was having an awful game last night and clearly looks so far out of his depth. So on that basis, I mean, it's a massive, massive concern, the perceived lack of effort in Europe's biggest competition. And I know a lot of people are going to bring up, you know, the whole Wembley debate about the pitch and, you know, is that a factor? But for me, I put it out on Twitter today, you look at Spurs' you know, away record in the Premier League alone. You know, we've only lost 3 games out of our last 24 away. So something tells me that Spurs haven't got an issue playing away from home. So why is Wembley becoming an issue when all you're asking the players to do, at the very simple play, a basic 5-yard pass, and even that can't be done? So it's something more that's happening.
Certainly seems to be something not quite clicking, not quite right at the moment. And it couldn't have come at a worse time, could it, with the North London derby just around the corner? It's a bizarre one. Ian, you was there last night, of course. Do you buy into the Wembley factor?
Well, I think that, you know, a football pitch is a football pitch. And I also think that, again, our group of players played the occasion rather than the game. You know, I don't subscribe to this Wembley factor malarkey, because if you can't raise your game in front of 85,512 spectators, then when are you?
And that's the point, isn't it? I mean, you know, the pitch is slightly bigger, we know. But of course, we're going to have to get used to it, Ian, aren't we? Because next season, we've got no choice but to play every single game we play there.
Exactly. And psychologically, if it is an issue, you know, treat it like an away game. You know, you know, psychologically get into your head that, oh, we're going into a coach and we're going to a different ground. You know, treat it like another London sort of derby if you have to. But, you know, yesterday it was like rabbits in headlights. It was, you know, people that internationals froze on the night. And that wasn't down to the weather. I don't know what it was, but, you know, we just didn't seem to have that composure. We were jittery, and you know, we were just not us. I don't know where we were, but it wasn't. You know, we weren't there to try and win the game.
And Chris, just to bring you in on this, one aspect of our play that I wanted to bring up on the podcast tonight that I don't know about you, but it gives me kittens, is our determination to try and play out the back. We see with Guardiola, he's determined to stick to it.
Yeah, no, I think it's caused us more problems in the Champions League, and it's caused Lloris problems as well. He's looked more jittery in a couple of the Champions League games than he would ever look in the Premier League. And I think that was quite a telling quote. I take the point that Wembley is not the issue here. You know, the form has tailed off. But Lloris did say after last night's match, looking ahead to the derby this weekend, it'll be nice to be in a Premier League stadium with a Premier League pitch.
Yeah. Now,
Pochettino said there was no issue with the pitch, but there was an NFL match there at the weekend, of course. It doesn't look, just from a spectator's perspective, it doesn't look like the same sort of pitch that you're used to seeing in the Premier League. I think it did cause problems. I completely take your point, though, as well, about why not treat it like an away game. We do have a very good away record, but it does feel to me like it is part of the problem in the Champions League. And yeah, Pochettino, some of his decisions do have to be questioned last night, and it is the first real spell of pressure for him. And I don't want to get on his back because he's the best manager I've seen. He's the first manager I've really had real faith in for a very, very long time. And you know, all managers are going to go through it. I'm sure it's going to strengthen him. I'm sure he's going to come out of it an even better manager, and he is still a young manager, so there's plenty for him to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jay, I don't know about you, but the opposition on Wednesday night, it's fair to say that we'll face better teams, I think, this season. So this wasn't the best team in the world, was it, that we lost to by any stretch of the imagination?
No, and I think they've lost four of their first 9 Bundesliga games. And we've got to remember, that CSKA were the 8th seed of pot 1 and Leverkusen were the 8th seed of pot 2. So in that respect, we couldn't have got 2 easier teams from the group. But, the thing with the pitch, the one thing I'll say about the pitch is I don't understand, if we're the home side, why we don't control the size of the pitch. I think, like I say, I think Wembley is an easy excuse, and the pitch is an even easier excuse, because professional players should be able to play on any side pitch. And we talk about the fitness of our players and how fit they are and how much more distance they cover than most clubs. So a bigger pitch should actually suit us more than a smaller one does. It should show our fitness and our strength, and that even more so.
Wembley takes all shapes and sizes of events, and as long as it's within the regulations, you'd think that they would see that and do that. I know there was the NFL game there at Sunday. I remarked watching the game last night about the centre circle looking quite muddy, for Wembley last night. But it's hard to know, isn't it, whether or not that had any direct effect. Another point I wanted to bring up on the pod, Rick, was Danny Rose. He was left on the bench for the game. It just seems to me a strange one when you're playing in arguably your biggest game of the season. And yes, we've got Arsenal on Sunday, but whatever happened to, taking one game at a time and all that?
It's a fair point. I think it's well known Poch likes to rotate the squad irregardless of the fixture. We saw, I think he did it away in the win over at CSK Moscow, where he did rotate the fullbacks in terms of Davis starting, Trippier. He does seem to do this on a regular basis. But I'm of the agreement with yourself, really, that the next game is the biggest game, and that it's a Champions League tie that we had to win. And therefore, I think Danny Rose is more than capable of handling 2 games in a couple of days. But Poch may argue otherwise. He sees the players in training. Obviously, he knows them better than we do. But I have to agree. There's no reason for me why Danny Rose couldn't have played last night and couldn't have played the game against Arsenal. Does Pochettino value the game against Arsenal more than he values this game? If it is the case, that's a bit of a concern, because both games are equally as important. And like we said, we fought so hard to get into the Champions League last season. It's paining to watch it. It really is, because as fans, I think like we all say, when we hear that Champions League music and you're there being part of it, it makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. And just to watch us play with, lethargic and lack of commitment, that hurts more than anything. You don't mind being beaten out of, quality, but I don't think anyone can take losing a game on a lack of effort. That's the hardest thing. I think that's what we're dealing with last night. For me, it was a lack of effort. One player, I don't like digging out players. I don't think we should ever do that, because we've been subject to that in the past as a club, picking on one player. But Christian Eriksen, this guy here, what frustrates, I think, a lot of Spurs fans, including myself, about him, is that we know with Christian Eriksen, he's got the quality in him, and we're not seeing it. And at the time that Eriksen was handed the new contract, I had to be honest and think to myself, did he deserve that contract at the time? He wasn't in great form at that point. We gave him the new contract, hopefully on the proviso that it was kind of going to, show him that, Spurs are still backing you. We still count on you. Potter's saying to the player, look, we still want you in our team. You're very much part of our future. And he just isn't delivering at the moment. And I really hope the fact that he was taken off for a graduate player still in Harry Winks, I really hope that is the reality check he needs, and that he knows that his place, he isn't untouchable and he's not undroppable. Because my biggest worry when you're looking at last night is the Sissoko money we spent. Okay, fair enough, we needed an extra midfielder. But I don't quite understand what Sissoko brings to us in that midfield that is different to what we've already got. Now, What I would like to think to myself is that why did we not spend that money, that 30 million, a bit more wisely and look to try and find an alternative to a Christian Eriksen? Because there are players out there. You look at Southampton, they signed Buffal, again, very much a creative spark player, got him for, I think 10 to 15 million. Cheap when you compare, we spent 30 apparently on Soko. Tadic even, and again, another Southampton player, a creative player. You look at along the leagues, you can get these players. I just wonder whether as a club, we did enough recruitment research. Anyone would tell you, Eriksen, he's great when he's on form, but when he's off form, which seems to be the case recently, what does he bring? If he's not bringing that, that creative spark, what else is he bringing to Spurs? And at the moment, I have to say, not much.
I've got a bit of a theory on the midfield. I mentioned to the lads off air a little while ago. We know that Dyer had a fantastic season last year in that midfield with Dembele, pretty much the best midfield partnership in the Premier League. And what Spurs have done since then is they've gone and bought Wanyama, of course, who in his own right is a very good player. But in bringing Wanyama in, he's brought him straight into the team in place of Dyer. And I just wonder whether or not that in one way or another has upset Dyer, quite rightly in many respects. So is he now, feeling a little bit out of place, his nose maybe out of joint? I don't know. It's just a theory. Chris mentioned that fantastic Man City game from one to the other. It's something only Spurs could do, isn't it? It's a bizarre one. In terms of, Ian, the Champions League, now looking at the bigger picture, of course, we face an away game and then finishing up at home. Can you see us going on from this point to qualify for the group stages?
To use another sporting analogy, we're now reliant on snookers, aren't we?
Yeah.
In football, in terms. And whilst it's not impossible, and you know my views, it only becomes impossible when it's mathematically impossible. But we are now reliant on other results going our way and us picking up maximum points. Now, to achieve that, we need to start weighing in with some goals from open play. We can't just keep waiting for somebody to be felled in the box for us to get a free at 12 yards. We must have that creativity in the middle of the pitch and all round the pitch to create some chances for our strikers. And I just think that going away to Monaco isn't going to be easy. And I doff my hat to the 975 brave souls that have got tickets for that away game. And I think that the CSKA game at home at Wembley, we are in a really, really delicate position. And as I think as Chris said quite succinctly, this is the first real test for Pochettino and his young squad, and I think we all hope and pray that he's going to have enough in his locker to make us tick again and for us to discover our mojo. But it's going to be difficult to get out of that group, and as Jason so adroitly put it, and laconically put it when he opened up the show. It's it could be welcome to the Europa League again, and I for one am not really looking forward to that situation at Wembley, which will be
it'd be horrific, wouldn't it? Really. It's tough enough in the Champions League when things aren't going your way, but let's try and finish this segment on a little bit of a positive if we can. Jay, going to come back to you to finish up on this segment. If you're Pochettino now, how do you turn this around? And has he got the resources without Kane and without Alderweireld to turn it around for Sunday?
Injured players are out, and we've seen we either play Son up front or we play Jensen up front, and neither of those things have really worked over the last couple of games. So there's not a lot you can do. You just hope that the tradition of the derby is what finally gets through to the players, and we finally get that performance that we've been craving for the last few weeks. And funnily enough, sometimes maybe you do need a horrific defeat to regroup and for the penny to drop with one or two players that they're not quite the bee's knees that maybe they thought they were. Maybe there's a little bit of complacency going through the squad. Maybe there's so many of the announced new contracts, the players have, I know, subconsciously think they've arrived at a level that they've not quite arrived at yet. But it's very difficult to complain that too many of the squad, because at the end of the day, we're still sitting there unbeaten and we're only 1 point off the top. So, we're not quite in the bottom three and performing, say, as West Ham have been doing at the start of the season. And you just hope that derby really brings it out of the players. And, we know that form books have gone out the window with it, but it's very difficult to sit here with your head, rule in your heart, and say, we'll go to Arsenal and get a big result, and everything will be fine after that.
I'll tell you what I'm going to do, just to finish up, lads. I want to go across the board on this one. There was an incident during the game. Dele Alli went down in the penalty area. It's up for debate whether or not he was clipped. I just want to get the team's thoughts on this one just very quickly. A one-word answer if you can, please, lads. We're going to start with Jay. Jay, should we have had a penalty?
For me, no.
And Ian?
For me, yes.
And Rick?
At the time, I would say no, but can I be honest, I've not seen about any highlights. I can't stomach to watch them yet, so I will say no.
And finally, Chris?
At the time, I thought yes. Having seen a replay, I would say no.
No, and see, it completely split our panel there. And watching it last night, I thought, to begin with, penalty. Having watched the replay, I've got to say, I think Dele Alli sometimes is the victim of his own theatrical movement towards the ground, if you will. I think if he goes down less theatrically there, he probably gets a penalty. I think, and it's sad to say, because if a penalty is a penalty, then it's a penalty, isn't it? But I think maybe he's a few referees now have got his card marked, and it's sad really, because he's such a great player. You don't want him to pick up that sort of reputation. I think maybe 75% of the time it genuinely has been fouled, but you tend to see that, don't you, with some of the really good players who get these reputations. So let's hope he avoids that. We're going to move on to what is mine, and I know a few of the lads' favourite part of the podcast each week, which is, of course, taking your questions on all things THFC. And you guys, as always, have been great in getting your questions into us. Don't forget to use the hashtag e-Spurs-pod, all one word, on either Twitter or Facebook if you've got a question for the podcast. Next week, we'll get those put to the lads. We're going to start with Ian tonight. First question is from Martin Dolan at Martin Dolan 101. He asks, would you take Berahino in January for 10 million, bearing in mind our troubles up front? We missed a trick not signing Moussa Dembele last season, he says.
No, I think that ship sailed a long time ago. I might have been tempted to take a punt on the Fulham Dembele at the time. And having spent an alleged, 30 million on Sissoko, and it's, I'm wondering if we could have got a tune out of Batshuayi that went to Chelsea that, it is alleged that caused maybe a rift between Mitchell, Pochettino and Levy. So, I wouldn't have perhaps, taken Berahino now. I think he's just... he's so out of form that if we signed him in January, it would take him until the start of the following season for him to get Pochettino fit, wouldn't it?
I mean, the worry is, of course, Kane coming back. The pressure's going to be straight on him. But if anyone can cope, it's Harry, surely. The next question I'm going to put to Chris. I think this is quite appropriate as we've got Chris on the podcast tonight. It's from Andrew Cashmore at Aussie Valdo. He asks, how can the club make sure the atmosphere in the new stadium is as good as White Hart Lane? Because Wembley last night was poor.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a really key thing. And that's part of what motivated me to write the book. I've seen a lot of clubs in my lifetime move to new stadiums, the Arsenal, the Emirates. I think a lot of Arsenal fans would say, of my generation, it's nothing like Highbury was as regards atmosphere. Southampton struggled a lot when they left the Dell to St Mary's. It took them a long time to settle there. I think this is going to be a key thing. I'm very sad to see White Hart Lane as we know it go, but completely for the club to move forward, it needs a new stadium. The fans need to be close to the pitch. They need to feel involved, and I think they always will do. But I do think sometimes, I really think that happens at Wembley. It feels almost too big. I know that sounds ridiculous, but you think about it, it's almost the Emirates plus White Hart Lane. I mean, 90,000 is a huge stadium. And there are continually, when you've got that many people, there are continually people getting up and down, people going for a drink a bit too early or needing to go to the toilet. There's just a constant stream of people moving around. If you ever get the time just to have a look at Wembley, there's just people moving around all the time. And it almost becomes a bit more like if you watch sport in America, where the sport almost becomes like incidental to the event.
You know what? I think you're spot on there, Chris. And it's something that we hadn't really thought about, I don't think, going into it. Of course, Wembley's a fantastic stadium to play football, but can we create that atmosphere and recreate the lane at Wembley? It'd be a real interesting one to see. And the next question goes to JJ. This is from Connor Suckling at Connor Suckling. He asked, in his opinion, he says Poch needs a plan B. And he asked, with the team he has now, how does he achieve that? Do you think we need to buy in January for him to have that plan B?
One of the things I worry about with a plan B is we talked about all last year of needing more pace in the team. And he went out and bought Nkudu, or as I like to call him, Mr. Set to Sign. But we've seen very little of him, first of all. He seems to, what we have seen of him, he looks like he's got a trick inside him. He looks like he can go past a player. He looks like he can use that burst of pace over a short distance. But for whichever reason, now we have got him, he seems a little bit reluctant to give him more than, 10 minutes almost in desperation at the end of a game. And then in Janssen, I would say, did we buy an alternative to Kane or did we buy a backup? And by that, what I mean is a backup for me is a player that comes in and plays exactly in that Harry Kane style, so that when Harry Kane isn't there, you bring him in and there's no difference to how you play. But what we appear to have bought is an alternative to Kane, who seems to want to use his physicality. He wants to back into defenders. And we see in Janssen so much receiving the ball with his back to goal, backing into players, whereas Kane plays on that half turn, and invariably when you see Kane get the ball, he receives the ball between him and the goal rather than him being between the ball and the goal. And the problem that we seem to have with Janssen, and it's not necessarily, I don't want to jump on Janssen's back for his performances, because the effort and that the boy's putting in is excellent, but it's as if that when we have Janssen there, we still kind of play the ball as if he is playing it into Harry Kane. And that, the big thing if you're going to use Janssen as an alternative is that it looks like you've got to get players running off him, as we did with the Son goal at Middlesbrough, with the first goal, where he's backing in and he lays it off to Son. But we don't seem to have, since Janssen's been up there, other than that goal, we don't really seem to see players running beyond Janssen to give him that chance to flick it off. And with Janssen playing with his back to goal so much, it's very difficult for him to hit a first-time shot. He's not really going to roll a defender because, as we've said before, he wants to go take everything on his left, so the clever defenders will just block that route off. And you kind of saw that with the penalty against Leicester, where the ball goes into him, but there was no option for him to shoot. There was no one running off him, and we had to rely on, should we say, a soft tug? Did it really look a penalty? But, an arm across the shoulder to create the chance. So, are we playing to Janssen's strength, or is Janssen failing to adapt to ours? And then when we have got that alternative to use, we don't seem at the moment to want to use it. It's really strange, and it's one that, it's a question for Pochettino. The problem is that any player we want to buy, it seems to me that the first requisite will be that you must be able to press. You must play that pressing game. And if you're not going to be prepared to do the press from the front, you're not going to be in Pochettino's team. So many of the alternatives that are brought up, should Spurs look to sign Berbatov back? I mean, as much as we'd all like it, and I heard another pod talking about Jermaine Defoe, and I'm a massive Jermaine Defoe fan, and for sure Jermaine Defoe's got goals in him. But if he's not going to press from the front, Pochettino's not buying you. And perhaps it does need a change to go to Plan B. Perhaps we do need Pochettino to drop the insistence on everyone playing the pressing football. And at the moment, the big problem with pressing football is that it seems to me we're just stuck in the rut of forcing teams into a mistake rather than really trying to create the chance ourselves. And, I do feel a little bit sorry for Eriksen when Janssen's playing, because perhaps Janssen's not giving him the right type of movement to angle the little through ball. And Lamella's stopped creating since Janssen's in the team. And we also know with Eriksen and Lamella that they're not the type of player that will knock it into feet and then continue their run and burst into the box themselves.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because you've got these new players who've come into the team over the summer who are going to change, you would think, are going to change the way the team play. But Pochettino is very determined, isn't he? He seems determined anyway to keep the style of play as it is, keep the formation exactly as it is. And it's almost a Guardiola type, ethos and theory, isn't it? That I play my way, and if you don't like it, I'll play it somewhere else. Because we haven't seen that flexibility from him yet. Whereas last week we saw from Guardiola the ability to be able to change formation. They blew Barcelona away, didn't they, in doing that? Whereas at the moment we haven't seen that from Pochettino, and that will be, I think, the next big test for him. Has he got the ability? Has he got the balls, for want of a better word, to be able to change the formation for the better of the team? We shall see. Another great question. So thanks for getting that into us. The final question of the night goes to Ricky. I'm going to ask this one, Ricky, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, just to finish off the questions for tonight. It's from Colin at Sciatho Spurs, great username, and he asks, what team talk would you give at the moment? Would it be an Al Pacino in Any Given Sunday, or a De Niro's Blood Bar from Untouchables? What sort of team talk would you give if you was Pochettino now? Would you play it Mr. Nice Guy, or would you be the hard taskmaster? Would you come down hard on the team?
Well, what I will say is, Andy, that I've said on social media, I think Pochettino has shown a lot of faith in this young group. I think average age 25 at best. He's put a lot of faith into these players, and arguably some of these players may not have got a chance as quick as he gave them at a different club. Now it's time that these players, they all say how much they love playing for him. They all say, he gives us an opportunity. It's time for these players, in my opinion, to step up now and back their manager, because I think what's been said in this podcast is right tonight. It's certainly not a Pochettino out whatsoever, but there are certain questions that do need to be asked, and we're questioning Pochettino purely down to a lot of these players as well, because they are the ones at the end of the day, when Poch does that team talk, they go out and play the game. Poch can't cross the white line, so he is relying on these players to deliver, and dress it up however you want. The players are not delivering. So I think the team talk has to be firm, but at the same time, it doesn't have to be along the lines of what Tim Sherwood used to do in terms of putting a player into a corner and end up isolating a player. We don't need that. It very much is a team game. And at the end of the day, this isn't about just one player not performing. It's a collective team performance that at the moment it just isn't good enough. And for me personally, you know what I'm going to say? Going into a North London derby, there shouldn't need to be much of a team talk, really. At the end of the day, we are severely at the moment being, targeted. It might suit us, in my opinion, going in there as the underdog. 6 without a win, 3 games. We've only scored 3 goals in our last 6 games. Everybody pretty much is expecting Arsenal to roll us over by God knows how many. So being the underdogs may very well suit us. But what I will say about Pochettino is that he does seem to have that ability in getting the best out of these players when it comes to the Arsenal games, that in terms of effort and commitment they've always put in, it's always been 100%. Now, there's no doubt that these players, they owe us one. And I'm talking about last night, the Wembley appearance, a club record attendance, 85,512 Tottenham fans turned out last night. And, some people question maybe the support of Tottenham Hotspur as a club, as a fan base. We've shown now on 2 occasions that we have got the ability to not only just kind of sell out on an occasion, but we've got such a massive fan base. So it's a lot about these players now rising to the occasion as much as what Pochettino does in terms of a team talk. And for me personally, there shouldn't really need to be one. The game itself, win that, and you've instantly got back, the fans that may have doubted. And it's the same for Poch. It's a huge game, biggest game of our season. Win this game. Look, we're not stupid. We're only 3 points off top spot. We're still unbeaten in the league. We've got, we've not made a terrible start to the league. Yes, we've had a bit of a blip in the league, but win this and we are so right up there. It would be the perfect way to go into the international break.
Certainly would. A win on Sunday and everything looks completely different, doesn't it? And you would think, I think you've made a great point there. You would think a lot of those players, they owe Pochettino one, don't they? Especially on Sunday. And I think they know that. He knows that. And as much as I'm going to be watching from behind the sofa on Sunday, I think we all are. I think it's in many respects is the perfect game to go into. You want something like that where they're arguably not going to need any motivation. Although, of course, we said that about Wembley, didn't we? But we shall see. And of course, we'll be doing a full preview on the Arsenal game coming up on the podcast. That is the end of the questions for this week. Thanks, guys, for sending them in to us. As always, you've been brilliant. And don't forget, you can get them into us each and every week for the e-Spurs podcast. Just head to our Twitter at @e_Spurs or our Facebook page, e-Spurs page, all one word. Just use the hashtag e-SpursPod with your question. We'll find it nice and easy and get it out on next week's podcast. But you guys have been great, as always, in doing that. Now, I mentioned that tonight we are, of course, not just joined by the regular e-Spurs team. We're really pleased to be joined tonight by Chris, and Chris has written a book all about the lane, and it's something that many Spurs fans, I'm sure, would love to do, but Chris has actually gone out there and done exactly that. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks very much for having me on the show. Really appreciate it.
No problem at all. Now, Chris, as I say, you've written this new book, A Love for the Lane, and as I say, many Spurs fans would love to put pen to paper and actually write about Spurs. What was your inspiration behind putting pen to paper and writing about White Hart Lane in particular?
Yeah, I mean, a lifelong ambition of mine, really, to write a book about Tottenham, the club I've always supported, and it seemed like the perfect time to do it. And White Hart Lane is a place that I've just loved going to watch football for so many years. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm really sad to be leaving it, in essence, in its current guise, even though I'm delighted that we've managed to find a site which, overlaps the current stadium. We're not moving far at all. That's great. I was terrified a few years back at the thought that Tottenham might go to Stratford. I'd have personally hated that. I'm not from Tottenham, but I believe Tottenham Hotspur should always be in Tottenham, and I'm delighted that's going to happen now. But yeah, it just struck me, so many great games there over the years, and I wanted to. This book isn't really about the greatest games; it's about the most significant games. So I wanted to try and find a significant game from probably every decade, and tell the story of what happened and where it's been possible to do that through the eyes of people who actually played in those games. So from the 60s onwards, I've been to meet people like Terry Dyson, who was part of that double winning team in 1961. I spoke to Alan Mullery, who skippered us to the UEFA Cup glory, winning the UEFA Cup on our own pitch in 1972, and Mickey Hazard doing likewise in 1984, and more recently with Harry Redknapp, the manager that night, of beating Inter Milan, the European champions. And they tell the story of what it was like to be involved in those really key, significant games. So it just struck me as the perfect time to finally get round to doing something I've always wanted to do, write a book. I originally was going to call it Leaving the Lane, and someone pointed out we're not really leaving the lane. If anything, we're moving a little bit closer to what is White Hart Lane, the station and the road of that name. So I changed the title to A Love for the Lane, because it is a very upbeat, optimistic book about the feelings and the emotions that match day inspires in all of us, fans, players, managers. And yeah, I'm really pleased to have been able to bring it out this season, which is going to be an emotional season when it comes to the final game, particularly. But hopefully, it's going to be a positive season. I'm still upbeat that we can turn this around.
I'm sure we can. I'm sure, and Spurs fans, we're certainly good at that, aren't we? Remaining upbeat despite the, everything around us falling apart. That's one thing we have to be good at as a Spurs fan. But just going back to the book, Chris. I mean, it's a fantastic read. Some great stats in there that I found fascinating. Going right back to the opening of the stadium, which happened really by chance, as you say in the book, due to an accident, actually, and just some really great stats. Now, I want to ask you, what was the most interesting thing that you found out about the lane that you hadn't been aware of previously?
Yeah, learning a lot about that opening game and drawing on a brilliant book, The Complete Record of Tottenham, if anyone hasn't got that, by Bob Goodwin, who's done an awful lot of research there, and finding out an awful lot about how we came to play at White Hart Lane, and that was because of an accident in a United League match, as it was against Woolwich Arsenal, as they were then. A big crowd turned up, and to try and get a view of that match, some of them crawled onto the roof of a refreshment bar, fell through that roof, got injured. The owners of the club at the time realised we needed a bigger ground than the one we had at Northumberland Park, and it just so happened there was a plot of land coming up for sale behind a pub called the White Harts, which at the time that the club moved into it was called the High Road Ground. No one's actually quite sure from all the sources I've read when it first became known as White Hart Lane. One theory is that didn't actually happen until after the First World War, and by that time we'd been there since 1899, a lot of people were still calling it the High Road Ground, even the Hotspur Ground. And then it gradually became known as White Hart Lane. And I've always loved the name White Hart Lane as well. I think a lot of us, there's a romantic kind of pull towards Tottenham because of the achievements, of the things that we've done first, being the first team in the 20th century to win the double, the first British team to win a European trophy. Tottenham Hotspur itself, a really special, unique name. White Hart Lane, a really special, unique name. I'm going to miss that because obviously it's going to be almost certainly a naming rights sponsor deal at the new stadium, and I'll miss it being called White Hart Lane. So, yeah, learning a lot about the history, and it struck me really, I didn't know an awful lot about the two games where we actually won the league on our own pitch, and there's another great book that I found by about those two title triumphs in 1951 and 1961. Coincidentally, we won the league against Sheffield Wednesday both times, which I didn't realise that. So 10 years apart, the crucial game which won us the title in 1951 and 1961 both took place against Sheffield Wednesday. There's a really good book, Champions of England, by Kevin Palmer, which I drew on for a lot of my research there. Just finding out more about that because, you know, there's been great cup finals. Tottenham have kind of traditionally in my life been a cup team, really. But I was thinking, what would it have been like to be a fan at White Hart Lane in 51 and 61 to actually see Tottenham win the title, and something which I would so dearly love to see before I die. And we came so close, the closest we've ever come last year. And I never believed last year we were going to win the league. I never believed it. I don't think we were in the title race really until that amazing result when Ericsson did do a great job for us up at the Etihad Stadium and beat Man City. That's only then at the end of February that we came into the title race. I never felt we were going to do it. I looked at Leicester's running. I thought by then that running looked pretty simplistic for them. I thought they would go and win the title by that point. But when we beat Man City just a few weeks back, I think that's the first time in my life where I thought we can actually go on and win the league. Yeah. And right now I don't feel like that at all. But
remain positive.
Yeah, I'm trying to remain positive. But who knows? One day, perhaps we will feel we will be there on an occasion like our forefathers in 51 and 61, and actually see Spurs win the title. It'll be amazing if that does happen.
Oh, wouldn't it just? I mean, you know, you're fed, aren't we, as Spurs fans, on these stories from parents and grandparents of the double team, and wouldn't it be great to have that team of our own that we pass on these memories? It's just absolutely fantastic, and hopefully that'll be something that comes with the new stadium. Be fantastic to see. I mean, just seeing the pictures of it growing from the ground, you know, almost on a daily basis. It seems to be going up extraordinarily quickly, doesn't it? That new stadium, but it's looking fantastic already. Makes your mouth water just looking at it. Fantastic stuff. I know some of the e-Spurs team have got a couple of questions for you, Chris. Ian?
Yeah, Chris. It's interesting to you speak. You know, my father was at the 61 game, and he said it was a pretty special day.
Wow!
But the actual question I've got for you is I know you mentioned the Inter Milan game. Of the games that you've witnessed at White Hart Lane, what have been your particular favourites and have stood out of being, you know, a great sort of like marriage of the football on the pitch against the atmosphere in the stands?
Most of the games that have meant a lot to me are featured in the book. So the first one chronologically is the Klinsmann home debut against Everton, where I was sat in the upper tier of the East stand and just had the most amazing view of Jurgen Klinsmann scoring his overhead kick. His first goal at the Lane, he'd already scored at Hillsborough at the weekend, and it was not just the way we played that night, this amazing attacking football under Ozzy Ardiles. You've got to think we had 5 forwards on the pitch that night, but the man who set up that goal was Stuart Nethercott, a centre-back, from open play in the area. Anderton whipped the cross in, Sheringham headed it back. Nethercott, for some reason, was up there as well. Only 20 minutes in to a game that's 0-0. You've already got 5 forwards on the pitch, and Stuart Nethercott's there to head it back to Klinsmann. He scored the most sensational goal, and it was the celebration, of course, the dive, every single player, including Ian Walker, coming charging out of his goal. At the time I was 14 or 15, and just to see that the whole place together, the whole team together, you just felt just part of something that was bigger than just a match. As I was saying earlier, just being part of this great event. So that game is something I will never forget. We went on to win 2-1 against Everton that night, and it's Darren Anderton who tells the story of that match in this book. Moving forward, beating Chelsea in the League Cup semi-final. I know it didn't amount to anything in the end, 2002, because we lost to Blackburn in the final, but then it had been a very long time since we'd got a win against Chelsea in any competition. It was dating back to 1990, as it still is in the league at the Bridge, of course. That stat still works in the league at the Bridge. Hopefully it won't be too long and we could maybe end that at the end of November, who knows. But that night, beating Chelsea 5-1 after so long without having beaten them. And it's Gus Poyet in my book who tells the story of that match, because he was, of course, playing against a team that he'd left only quite recently. He had a lot of his former teammates and friends on the pitch that night, and I spoke to him about what it was like to be a pretty popular player at Chelsea, but then having to go out there against a team he'd only just left and do the job for Tottenham. And he said he was just so determined that night. He even gave a little team talk himself, just saying, we cannot lose to Chelsea again. We have to beat them, and we did in some style, 5-1, and it's such a shame it didn't count for anything. And then the next one is when we did the same to Arsenal, 2008. Beating them 5-1, and of course that really did count for something. Amazing night. Jermaine Gina's played so well that night. Again, we hadn't beaten them, I think it was for 27 games going into that, under Arsene Wenger, who just kind of monopolised the North London derby as such. Just hadn't really experienced a defeat, I think, to Tottenham since Jerry Francis had put one over on him. And that night just sweeping the floor with Arsenal and going on to beat Chelsea in the final was incredible as well, for the last trophy that we've won. And then more recently is that Inter Milan game. I think one of the most amazing atmospheres. Just Harry Redknapp tells the story of that, and he says you can't much as you're trying to focus on a match as a manager, you can't ignore an atmosphere like that. So you get wrapped up in it, because the Tottenham fans that night were immense. And my colleague at the BBC, Nick Godwin, who tells the story of another match, the 9-1 beating of Wigan, when he had to commentate on a goal every 5 minutes in the second half, because 9 of those 10 goals came in the second half. I'd forgotten that. 9 of those 10 goals in the match came in the second half. And Nick Godwin was also commentating on the Inter Milan game, and on BBC Radio London, he just said, right, I'm not going to say anything for 30 seconds, 60 seconds, just listen to this. This is what White Hart Lane sounds like tonight. I mean, that's how good the atmosphere was.
It was
that night.
It was rocking.
And in a way, that's what disappointed me about last night. And I don't think that's a Spurs issue. I think it's something a lot of teams struggle with at Wembley. There's no doubt that our fans are great at getting behind the team. I think it's harder to do for whatever reason at Wembley. I don't know if it's the acoustics. I don't know if it's just such a vast arena. But yeah, those games are the ones that have really stood out to me in my lifetime. And the book ends, actually, I wasn't there that day, but the final game I've included is when we beat Chelsea 5-3 on New Year's Day 2015, because I think that was the first time a lot of people really thought Pochettino is taking this club somewhere. Harry Kane was immense that day, and it's Jonathan Pearce, the BBC commentator for Match of the Day, who tells the story of that match in this book, because we just played ever so well that day. All of those games are ones that really stood out to me, and they're significant games. So as I say, this book isn't about the greatest matches. I'm sure there's many, many more great matches, but they're all significant for some key reason.
So where can I get a copy of this book? Because it sounds fantastic, and I'm not just saying this to provide Chris with a marketing opportunity.
His own commission.
I was at some of those games, so it'd be great to get hold of a copy.
At the moment, it's only on Amazon, so you have to go onto Amazon and search it. Search "A Love for the Lane" is the title. My name's Chris Slegg. The second name is Slegg. So you can find it on Amazon. I'm hoping it will be in bookshops soon, but at the moment it's only available on Amazon. Or you could enter or you probably can't enter the competition really, because you're part of the podcast.
No, I'm barred.
I'm going to have a copy signed by Terry Dyson. Quite topical, because as things stand, he is still the only Tottenham player ever to have scored a hat-trick against the old enemy. He did that in 1961, actually the season after we'd won the double. He did that in August 1961, scoring 3 goals in a 4-3 win at the Lane. Let's hope that changes this weekend and Janssen comes off the bench and gets a hat-trick.
Fantastic.
It might be the case that stat ends this weekend, but as of now, as we record this show, Terry Dyson's still the only Tottenham player to know what it feels like to score a hat-trick against Arsenal. He tells us all about that in the book. I've got a signed copy by him, so if people want to tweet me at a love for the lane, that's all one word, at a love for the lane on Twitter, and just tell me about their favourite match at the Lane and why. And then this time next week, so Thursday the 10th of November, at random I'll choose a winner and send them the signed copy of A Love for the Lane, signed by Terry Dyson. So yeah, those are the two ways. Enter a competition by tweeting at A Love for the Lane, telling me about your favourite match and why. It has to be a home match at the Lane, obviously. Or search it out on Amazon by typing in A Love for the Lane. And hopefully I might have an update soon that it's also in the bookshops.
Fantastic. Well, listen, best of luck with that, Chris. And guys, you've got to get this book. It's well worth the read. Some fascinating information in there, as I mentioned before. Loads of stuff that I never knew. I'm sure you guys out there will feel the same about it. And what better time of year to get it now? Great Christmas present. So make sure you head to Amazon and have a look for that. It's Chris Slegg and it's A Love for the Lane. Chris, really appreciate you coming on the podcast tonight. Thoroughly enjoyed having you on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been great show. Really been a pleasure to be a part of it. So keep up the good work.
No problem at all. Listen, Chris, I know you're going to stick around for the next 10 minutes or so just as we finish up the podcast tonight because, of course, we have got to talk about that big game, that looming fixture on Sunday, which is, of course, the North London derby. We head to the Emirates with not a great record, it's fair to say, up there at their ground. I was looking through some stats just off air with a couple of the lads there, and we, in the end, decided not to mention any of them because they weren't too great to look at. So let's try and think positive, shall we? We've got a massive game coming up on Sunday. Ricky, can Pochettino turn this around?
Of course, you've got to remain positive, and the fact of the matter is that last season, every time the question was asked to this young side, we did always form a good response. Having said that, obviously, this is probably the first time, as we've alluded to tonight, where there is that little bit more pressure on him. You know, we can't really afford to go 7 games without a win. We've got to find goals, and that's pretty much, where we're at. We've got to find goals in this team, and hopefully we are putting our hopes, hopefully on Harry Kane being back available in some kind of way to feature in the game, whether that be starting or from the bench. But like I said to you, Andy, just a short time ago, there shouldn't need to be a motivation for this game. These players should know how big this game is. It's the first game as a Spurs fan we look out for on the fixture list. When are we playing them at home? When are we playing them away? It's the biggest game of our season, no doubt. And if we can win this game, then it will simply reignite our season.
Absolutely, it would. I think Wembley would certainly be a distant memory if we go out there and get a result on Sunday. Jay, in terms of the lineup, we see it rotating on a regular basis now, don't we? What would you go with on Sunday?
That's the thing. There's so many players that aren't in form, isn't it? That previously we've looked at saying who could we leave out from midfield and things like that, and yet now we're trying to find who the hell we can play. I think injuries obviously will dictate much of it. It looks like Toby won't make it back, so I presume that Dyer will stay in the back four. It looks probably like Dembele will miss the game from the ankle injury that he picked up yesterday. So I presume we'll have Wanyama, and that means Dele Alli having to drop alongside Wanyama, and that I never like to see, because for me, I want Ali bursting into the box, particularly when we're lacking goals. That's one of our avenues, and I think that's another one of our attacking strengths gone. Sissoko is banned. One or two people I've heard saying today it's unfair that he only got a 3-match ban, that we'd have been better off with him getting a 30-match ban after his performance yesterday. But that was a bit. And actually, just on that, as poor as Sissoko was yesterday, and you can't concede possession 31 times in a game. The one thing I'll give him a little bit of credit for is at least he didn't run and hide yesterday. The fact that he lost the ball 31 times tells you how many times he actually showed for the ball, and he never actually dropped his head. No. Whereas I can remember going to White Hart Lane, seeing Tom Huddleston hit a couple of free kicks straight into goalkeeper's arms and then never wanted to take a free kick again. And Jermaine Genius doing similar things, one shot that went into the crowd and therefore I'm not going to shoot again. So, it's a tiny, tiny crumb of comfort from Sissoko, but at least it's something that was worth pointing out. He's suspended. Is Lamela going to be back? Because, he seemed to miss the game Saturday through illness, but there was no sign of him on the bench yesterday. I suppose the really big conundrum is having Doug Eriksson out yesterday and taking him off really early in the game. Does he reinstate him to the team, or does he give him an even bigger kick up the backside and leave him out completely? And then what do we do with Jensen and Son up front? It's a difficult one, I suppose. For me, the front three would be Lamela, Eriksson and Son, with Jensen up front. But, is that a side that I look at and honestly feel can win the game there? And with the injuries that we've got and the other bits and pieces, it's difficult to see any other side there. And I'd be astonished if he brought Nkudu in for a first Premier League start. But perhaps it is time to be brave and try something a little bit different and see if Arsenal might well set up for an Eriksson Lamela type thing. And can we throw them a curveball and maybe you do chuck Nkudu on for a start?
It's such a conundrum, isn't it? Because of, you mentioned there, the injuries, the players that we've got on their way back. Whether or not they'll be back for Sunday, we still don't know. Ian, in terms of the forward line, it's another problem in itself, isn't it? Another conundrum to be solved, because Arsenal, we know, have been a lot better at the back this season. One of their big weaknesses in years gone past has been their defence, arguably. But now they've got Mustafi, who adds a lot of solidity in there for Arsenal. And they seem to have formed a bit of a bond in that defensive line that they didn't have in previous years. Of course, they've got Peter Cech at the back also. A great keeper always helps, doesn't it? In terms of our attacking options, would you stick with Son based on last night, or would you be tempted to give Janssen a run out?
Well, just following on from Jason's excellent analysis on our options and going on from thinking about plan A's and plan B's and all that sort of stuff. We've got to go there and we've got to win the game. Yes, we don't want to lose it heavily, but we have to go and compete. Now, for me, what is to stop us, starting with Nkudu and starting off with somebody on the other, maybe somebody on the other side of the pitch and playing Son and Janssen in tandem with one another. At the end of the day, if you've got a strong back four or back five in Arsenal, and the likes of the Bellerins and all of that can bomb forward, then maybe you've got to give Arsenal something else to think about. Because ultimately, if we are predictable and we go with 4-2-3-1, you bet your bottom dollar that Wenger will have a different option to counter that. As we've seen with the Leverkusen boss, he managed to outthink Pochettino so well in the game last night that maybe we need to do something innovative and courageous on Sunday and maybe play with a different formation, and give Janssen that support, but give the Arsenal back four something else to think about. I just think that maybe we do need to be courageous and go out there and try and win the game.
We're going to need to be bold, aren't we? You would think getting a result at Arsenal is always tricky, because the danger is once they get a goal and go a goal up, they then get the crowd behind them, and it's then very, very difficult, isn't it, to come back from that, unless you've got a massive game changer, as we had in Bale going back to that fixture where, of course, we turned the game around, didn't we, from a losing position. And we haven't really got that kind of game changer in our team at the moment, have we? So you would think we need to be solid, go in there and try and get the first goal, because otherwise it can be quite tough. Chris, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Welcome to the podcast. Is it a good or bad time to be playing a North London derby?
I'm kind of terrified because it feels bad. You look at the form, you look at the injuries. But I'm actually quite a pessimistic fan usually, but I feel like it's a good time because I feel last night was so disappointing. For Poch to come out and say he was embarrassed by the style of the defeats, I'd rather be playing Arsenal away on Sunday than playing Burnley or Middlesbrough. Or we need to end this run. Those players, I don't know if it was a lack of effort. It's certainly a lack of confidence. There shouldn't be a lack of confidence. They proved it again. When we beat Man City hadn't dropped a point.
Yeah.
They weren't as undefeated. They had a 100% record, and we absolutely dominated in that first half. They need to reinstill the belief, but I feel this is a good time. I am terrified, as I say, but I feel it's a good time. A good fixture, maybe not a good time to be playing them, but it's a good fixture to have next after what happened last night, because they know they have to play their best. They can't be any turning up and taking on a middleweight team. The form that Arsenal are in, every single player has. I know you could say that about last night. If players weren't giving 100%, I'm not sure that's the case. But if they weren't, they should have been. But this weekend, certainly, everyone has to be on the very, very, very top of their game, and no one can shrink into themselves, and they have to rediscover their self-belief. We've got so many players who are out of form at the same time. I don't understand why that's happened. Dele Alli, Christian Eriksen, Eric Dyer perhaps can be explained a bit by the fact he's had to move around and be used in different positions. But they've all had short careers. But in their short careers at Tottenham, we've seen the heights, and I can't understand how they're all so far below that at the moment. I didn't see this, but I read in the paper today that Glenn Hoddle said last night maybe it was a mistake to sign so many players to long-term contracts in the summer, that maybe they've just eased off a bit, become a bit too comfortable. I mean, I'd hate to think that's the truth, but then he's managed at the top, he's played at the top, he's probably got a better insight than me of the effect that maybe that can have on people's mentality. But going back to your question, I think it's a good fixture to have right now. 6 games without a win, we have to try and end that, and everyone has to play at their absolute maximum.
I know I'll be watching from behind the sofa. I'm sure there are many other Spurs fans going to be joining me in doing that on Sunday. Let's hope it is a perfect game to go into after Wembley on Wednesday. And wouldn't it be fantastic if they get the result there? Then it's a real springboard, isn't it, for the rest of the season? We shall see. Okay, let's finish this podcast as we do every single podcast and get the predictions of the e-Spurs team. We'll go across the board once again to finish off this week. And we're going to start with Jay. Your prediction for Sunday?
We've got so many players out of form, and I just worry if we'll create enough chances there, because I always feel if you're going to go and win at the Emirates, other than Middlesbrough, they usually always score at the Emirates, don't they? So you're going to have to score at least twice to win there. Have we got a sinners to go there and score twice with the form that we're in? I fear not. And my other big worry is, let's be fair, we got a couple of songs about players that dig out Mesut Ozil, but he's certainly in a fantastic run of form, and we wish we had a couple of Eriksen's and Ali's playing in the way that Ozil is at the moment. So, obviously your heart always wants it to do, but my head, God, I hate saying it, but I fear that we'll come back on a 0-2.
And I know exactly what you mean, because I was thinking about this fixture earlier on and I feel exactly the same. The heart is always optimistic, but then the head takes over, doesn't it, unfortunately? Rick, your prediction for Sunday?
I'm certainly the same with Jason. I think we're going to have to score at least a couple. Okay, I'm trying to be optimistic. I'm going to say 2-1 Spurs. Okay,
so a nice 2-1 win. And 2 would certainly be nice, bearing in mind our current goal scoring plight, as it were. That'd be fantastic. So 2-1 from Rick. And Ian?
I'm going to go for 1-1. I just look at how we've played over there the last few years. If memory serves me right, did we get a draw the last 2 years? I'm trying to put my head and my heart in balance, and. Yeah, 1-1. I'll stick with 1-1.
Okay, so at the moment we've got a real mixed bag of predictions. Of course, we're going to finish up with Chris. Chris, your prediction for the North London derby on Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, looking at the form, I don't really know why I'm saying this, but I'm trying to be as optimistic as I can be. I think I'm going to go for 1-1 as well. I think we're going to raise it. I think, a lot of people have said the unbeaten thing, does it really matter? I'd like to think maybe it does. I'd like to think, even the West Brom game where we conceded late to Chadley and we found a way to get back into that and take a point, and that's not something Tottenham traditionally have been all that good at, to go behind in the last 10 minutes and still come away with something. I think that might help, the unbeaten thing. I just think Arsenal are playing so well at the moment, and we're not scoring. I can't see us scoring a couple, and I can't see Arsenal not scoring. So I think the most I can hope for is a 1-1 draw, but I would certainly take that right now.
I think as well, if he rotates the fullbacks, as we usually see, which would mean, particularly if Walker's played too, if he did rotate and pick Trippier, we'd of course be faced with the fact that we'd be highly unlikely to ever, there wouldn't be a single player on the pitch that's even scored a goal against Arsenal for us. Because if Kane's out and Alderweireld's out, Chadley was sold, Kyle Walker is the only one, I think, then that's actually scored against them.
That's a great point, yeah.
And if he doesn't play, perhaps Hugo can have a massive long punt downfield and get a gust of wind or something.
Maybe do a Jennings for us and save the day. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a fantastic afternoon if they can get a result.
Danny Rose.
Danny Rose, of course.
Danny Rose will be back. That's true. Danny Rose will be back. So there we go. That's how long we'd have to go back to find someone who scored against them.
Listen, any sort of Spurs goal, any goal from a white shirt on Sunday would be more than welcome. It's going to be a tough game, but a win there would certainly turn things around. And let's try and finish on an optimistic note and hope that we get that win on Sunday up at the Emirates. Fantastic stuff. First up, Chris, thanks for coming on the podcast tonight. Thoroughly enjoyed that.
Yeah, keep up the good work with the show. It's always a great listen, and thanks for having me on.
Brilliant. No problem at all. And don't forget, guys, you can get hold of the book via Amazon. It's Chris Slegg, SLEGG, and Chris is giving away a copy of the book. Chris, do you want to just remind people how they can get hold of a copy of the book but via the competition?
Yeah, thanks indeed. So if you want a signed copy by Terry Dyson, the only man, Tottenham player ever to score a hat-trick against Arsenal, tweet at a love for the lane, telling me about your favourite match at White Hart Lane and why. And this time next week, Thursday the 10th of November, one entry will be chosen at random, and I'll post that book out to you. Or you can find the book on Amazon, A Love for the Lane. And I hope you enjoy reading it. And if you do buy it and read it, please feel free to leave an honest review on the Amazon website.
Certainly, absolutely, and what a great time to go out and buy it, make a great Christmas present. That is the e-Spurs podcast for this week. My thanks, of course, to Chris for coming on and joining us this week, and thank you for listening wherever you're listening to us from around the globe. Don't forget to subscribe to the show via iTunes or on Acast. On behalf of Jason, Ricky, Chris, Ian and myself, have a great week, and as always, come on you Spurs.
No one can stop